If you're on the autism spectrum, like me, chances are your formal diagnosis has changed over the years. The shift from distinguishing things like Asperger's to grouping everyone under the same autism spectrum disorder umbrella happened fairly recently. Maybe you adopted autism spectrum disorder with open arms, or maybe you continue to use terms you've been using from the beginning. Different people have different preferences, and there's no one right way to talk about it, even among the people coming up with these terms. In the last few years, some researchers have started pedaling back from the decision to smush all the autism into one big group. They suggest that we should once more refer to subcategories of autism. But importantly, not the old ones. This time, they're proposing 4 groups based on not just behavior, but on genes and age of diagnosis. And it might help people find the right kind of support. Here's a new way to think about autism. The way one person describes their autism diagnosis and themselves will be different from how someone else with the same experience describes it. In this video, we'll use the terms autism spectrum disorder and identity-first language like autistic people, but please know we respect whatever terms you choose to use to describe yourself. And some people refer to autistic symptoms as traits, because symptoms might imply there's always something wrong that needs to be fixed. In fact, many autistic people feel they don't need to be fixed, and neurodiversity is fine, actually. But we're using the word symptoms because these are things that can be challenging for autistic people, and having appropriate support can help them live happier lives. The papers we're talking about today refer to them as symptoms. So with that established, let's talk about this new research. In my lifetime, we've seen professionals differentiate autistic people based on the extent of their social communication and repetitive behaviors. We've also seen a broader acceptance of these conditions under one umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. But not long after autism spectrum disorder was written into the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, some researchers began saying we should split it back up into subgroups. Now, they're not suggesting that we go back to the way it was before we unified under one roof. Instead, they're proposing new flavors of autism based on what scientists believe today. After combing through diagnostic tests and behavioral reports from more than 5,000 people diagnosed with autism, a group of researchers in 2025 identified these categories. The largest portion of their sample fell into a group they called social/behavioral. A little more than a third of the individuals had this flavor of autism. This group was united by their challenges with communication, attention, and anxiety, but not significant developmental delays. In addition to their autism, they often had ADHD, anxiety, or major depression. Those bonus diagnoses are called comorbidities, and they were common among people in the social behavioral group, but not so much in the next group, who were said to experience moderate challenges. This was the second largest group, encompassing about 1/3 of the sample population. People in the moderate autism group also didn't have developmental delays, and compared to the social behavioral group, they had far fewer difficulties with the social and behavioral stuff, which you might have guessed from the name. To be clear, compared to someone who hasn't been diagnosed with autism, people in the moderate group still had more symptoms, but they weren't experiencing it all to the extremes found in other autism subcategories. Like the next category, mixed autism spectrum disorder with developmental delays. Yeah, they probably could have workshopped this title a bit more, but what it lacks in brevity, it makes up for in clarity. The almost 20% of the sample population that made up this group had a mixture of what the other groups had with added developmental delays. This group often had intellectual disabilities, language delays, and movement disorders, but did not usually have the other comorbid diagnoses, like ADHD or anxiety, that can come along for the ride in the social behavioral group. Which brings us to the least common of the 4 categories, with 10% of the sample population. They were categorized as broadly affected. People in the broadly affected group experienced it all. And this time, when I say they experienced it all, I mean including the comorbidities. So we have the whole spectrum broken down into social behavioral, moderate, mixed, and broadly affected. Like every new concept, these categories started out as an idea based on a limited set of data. But as the researchers sought to test their categories, they found validation everywhere they looked. Parent reports and clinicians supported these classifications, and a totally different sample population of autistic people also fell into the same categories. So it doesn't just describe these individuals. The evidence for these categories isn't just behavioral either. The researchers found genetic differences among the 4 groups that support the establishment of the new categories. But before we get into that, all science needs funding, so please excuse this ad. Thanks for watching SciShow. We've heard you loud and clear that the SciShow audience loves rocks. That's why we keep making new Rocksbox videos, highlighting another geological marvel every month. And when you subscribe to the Rocks box, you get a sample of that month's rock sent directly to your door. You could get chalcopyrite or anhydroagate. There's water in there. It's really cool. Or, spoiler alert, rainbow moonstone. Rocksbox is so popular that we've had a wait list in the past because we can only source so much of each rock. But right now we have rocks to spare. So if you've been hoping to get your very own Rocksbox, now's the time. Find the monthly Rocksbox subscription, individual samples, and Rocksbox merch at complexly.store/rocks. Members of each of the 4 groups had genetic profiles that resembled each other and were unlike that of people in the other groups. So if you only looked at everyone's genes, you'd have a good chance of putting them in the same categories as if you were basing it on their diagnostic tests. For example, people in the social behavioral group generally had genetic variants that other researchers have already linked to ADHD and depression. And since people in that category also tend to rack up those additional diagnoses, the researchers see that as support for grouping a portion of autistic people into the social behavioral category. Those in the moderate group had some variation in what researchers refer to as less essential genes. Remember, those are people who tend to demonstrate mild symptoms. There's still something going on there, but these genetic variations aren't associated with super severe symptoms. People in the mixed group had genetic variation that's much less common if you looked for it in any other population, which also lines up with this being one of the less common categories. And in these cases, we're not talking 1 or 2 letters of DNA swapped. They had multiple genetic variations going on at once. And people in the broadly affected group had the most of what are called high-impact non-inherited variants, though they had a lot of inherited variants too. This includes stuff like the genes and proteins involved in Fragile X, which is known for developmental delays, intellectual disabilities, and feelings like hyperactivity and aggression. That's pretty much exactly how the broadly affected group was described. So the researchers point to the genetic evidence as further support for these 4 categories. It might also help explain why people who fell into different categories were generally diagnosed at different ages. Now, the age that you're diagnosed depends on a lot of factors. Too often, people are living with symptoms for years before getting a diagnosis due to social, cultural, financial, or other reasons. But symptoms can appear at different ages for different people, and sometimes there's a genetic connection with when your symptoms become more noticeable. Maybe you've heard the relatively new term ADHD. It describes anyone with both autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and a lot of those folks are diagnosed as adults, including me. There's a significant genetic correlation between later diagnosed autism and comorbidities like that, even if it doesn't fully explain what's going on. On the other side of that age range, people in the broadly affected and mixed categories are likely to be diagnosed earlier in life, likely because of the developmental delays characteristic of those categories. If you're not making eye contact, have low muscle tone, or other physical displays of autism that a parent might recognize in a toddler, they can bring it up with a pediatrician when you're young. And again, people in those mixed and broadly affected categories often have genetic variations that coincide with early diagnosis. A person's genes, the way they navigate the world, and the age at which autism became apparent all provide some support for this 4 categories of autism idea. And with these new categories, people might even have an easier time accessing therapies that work best for them. We know from a survey answered by 200 autistic adults without intellectual disabilities that finding the right support is crucial. Some of them shared what it was like to work with mental health professionals who didn't get what their flavor of autism was all about. Often the results were life-threatening. I'm about to talk about suicide, so please skip to the time code on screen if that discussion would be unhealthy for you today. These specific individuals with autism were surveyed because they're in a population that we know is at risk for contemplating and dying by suicide. So it's not representative of everyone holding an autism diagnosis, but it's a valuable sample for conversations around suicide. Despite their risk, more than half of the people surveyed reported unmet mental health or social support needs. And those who did get help said it literally saved their lives. But getting the right kind of support turns out to be as important as getting it at all. Survey participants reported that getting therapy that turned out to be inappropriate for them was disempowering and made them feel worse. If you're in the social behavioral group, but you work with someone whose area of expertise is more aligned with the broadly affected group, it could lead to feelings of hopelessness and incapacity. Nobody wants that. And having these new categories as shared language or reference points could help people avoid those mismatches. Now, I said could because it's definitely not an inevitability. Introducing new labels always comes with risks. If your new classification feels less aligned with who you are than how you previously described yourself, it could just reopen the same can of worms we've been trying to close. Time will tell if this one does more good than bad, or if it even catches on. There are other researchers who have recently divided the autism spectrum into completely different groups, and no one knows which classification system will stand the test of time. Plus, remember how I said those researchers found validation everywhere they looked? Well, they didn't look everywhere, like, asking autistic people if the new label seemed appropriate. Ideally, a new classification system would have the stamp of approval from folks it will directly impact. As the statistician George Box once said, all models are wrong, but some are useful.